situation in Iran only gets graver every day. We are seeing more and more video rolling in of the Ayatollah's torture and killing of his own people. And these aren't somehow fighters or civil warriors. These are democracy demonstrators. And they've ended up in body bags, rows and rows of body bags. Video of a 12-year-old boy gravely injured by a pellet gun or perhaps buckshot. We're seeing that. Families are trying to find their loved ones amid masses of the dead, rows of body bags in hospitals. Far from honoring the pledge to stop the killing, the regime is doubling down. The Associated Press reports the Iranian prosecutor denies Trump's claims 800 prisoners were spared execution, and the Trump administration seems to be gearing up to take action. President Trump said last night he was sending, in his words, an armada to Iran, which should arrive there in the next couple of days.
We have a lot of ships going that direction, just in case. We have a big flotilla going in that direction, and we'll see what happens. We have a big force going toward Iran. I'd rather not see anything happen, but we're watching them very closely.
Dr. Kian Tajbakhsh is with us. He was in solitary confinement in Iran, now an international relations professor at NYU. Former U.S. ambassador to NATO, Dr. Kurt Volker. Dr. Tajbakhsh, I want to start with you. It's actually, we are unable to really fully describe what is happening in Iran because of the brutality there. But you predicted this, that the blackout by the internet and President Trump taking his foot off the neck of the Ayatollah would allow them to crush and kill tens of thousands of people. The question is this the beginning of a democratic revolution in Iran, or has this wave of protests sadly been ended?
Well, good evening, Leland, and to the ambassador. Unfortunately, I think in the short term, the level of brutality, which is quite unprecedented in the history of Iran, has crushed the demonstration, the protesters for now. But the problem is that Iran has experienced multiple protests across a whole swath of different sectors of the population over the last 15 years. And so I think that obviously because the regime cannot solve the problems that has given rise to these grievances, this is going to erupt again. Protests will erupt again at some time in the future. But for now, very sad to say, the Iranian regime has decided to do really the unthinkable, which is to murder and kill, perhaps 10,000 of its own citizens.
No, we're hearing reports and seeing video to support people being executed in hospitals. If they were wounded in the streets, they are brought to a hospital, and then the regime's gunman comes through and executes people in the hospital. And that brings up an important point, Ambassador Volker. The Israelis were accused of, quote-unquote, genocide in Gaza during a war. It wasn't genocide. But even if you believed what Hamas was saying, the Israelis were not doing anything close to what we see in video that Iran is doing, yet the world is largely silent. Why is that?
Yeah, that's hard to explain because the regime has really escalated, as Dr. Tajbakhsh said, just to a degree that we've never seen before. This is really an unprecedented level of execution of people, of a regime targeting its own people. And that's why it's not called genocide. It's not genocide because the regime is targeting its slaughter. Own people. It's slaughter. It is inhuman what they are doing. And as far as the global reaction goes, and I think this is partly what we're also seeing President Trump grappling with, he is willing to do something about this. He's willing to use force. He's sending forces to the Mediterranean and presumably also the Persian Gulf. But the question is, what would be effective?
The USS Abraham Lincoln should be there in a couple of days. Another carrier strike group reportedly moving through the Mediterranean. I'll ask that to Dr. Tajbakhsh. It's one thing to go in and have targeted strikes like we did against Iran's nuclear facilities. It's another thing to become the close air support in a civil war. I went through that in Libya on the rebel side. It did not end up well. What is the answer to those who say we must do something and then ... and then what?
Right.
I think that there is a strategy that is reasonable and understandable. I'm not a military analyst, but from where I can sit, there is a sweet spot. There is an overlap between what is in the national interest of the United States and its regional partners, such as Israel, and the interests of the democracy protesters in Iran. And let me just briefly say what I think that is. First of all, the Iranian threat to regional partners such as the Gulf and to Israel consists of their ballistic missiles and cruise missiles arrayed in the southern coast of Iran.
Dr. Tajbakhsh, I hate to interrupt you. I just got to get a last word from Ambassador Volker real quick. Is this a situation where you're going to have a coalition of the willing to go after Iran, or is this something the United States can do by itself in somewhere around 15 or 20 seconds?
Right. The key thing is what military force will achieve. We can take out the Ayatollah. We can take out senior government officials. We can go after the troops that are killing people in the streets. We can do all of those things. But we need to know what comes next. Where does this go? We don't know that yet.
Yeah, excellent point. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll continue to watch it through the weekend and hope that something happens. Anything's better than the Ayatollah as it exists. Some of the barbarians there are worse than ISIS. Thank you both.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.